Discover the amazing, clinically proven health benefits of original Tahitian noni. Original Tahitian noni includes powerful antioxidants, adaptogens, nutrients, and phytonutrients to naturally boost energy levels, immune system function, and overall health. Meticulously sourced from French Polynesia, this is the original superfruit. Accept no imitations. Original Tahitian noni. Visit ATR Health at alchemicaltechrevolution.com. and click on the Shop Here tab for more details.
But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
You're listening to the Alchemical Tech Revolution, and I am your host, Wayne McRoy. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are around the world. Tonight, we're going to discuss modern medicine's missing pieces. This is going to be an interesting program tonight. You'll see we're going to discuss some of the basics of alchemy and the alchemical processes from one of the master alchemists of the 20th century. We'll be reading from a book titled The Alchemist's Handbook, a manual for practical laboratory alchemy by the late Frater Albertus. This is an interesting one. We're going to read a little bit from the foreword and the preface and into the beginning portions of this book, and we're going to explain some of the missing pieces to the puzzle that is modern medicine. You see, they've taken some of the old concepts from the alchemical processes and from the old natural sciences, and they've separated them out into different strata of circumstances in our modern medicine, and they only use bits and pieces of the alchemical process to produce medicines in the modern era. And this essentially leads to a condition wherein we're missing components that are key to the healing process. We're missing the spiritual side. We're missing the very essence of the medicinal product. And this is of key importance in my estimation and my view, because there was a time when those doctors of old, those practicing alchemists, were able to produce tinctures, were able to produce different elixirs that had different healing properties and were able to elicit the healing response from the body in a much more favorable way than our modern medicines do. Much of our modern medicines, the pharmaceuticals, are based upon petroleum. And this in and of itself is a bit problematic, but when you remember that petroleum itself is actually a product of nature, it does have its uses at certain times. But certainly, they've distilled the essence out of the medicines, and the essence, in my estimation, is the important factor in eliciting the healing response from the body in the natural way. And this is largely what has been left out in modern times. So we're going to go ahead and explore some of these thoughts as to these alchemical processes, because these are key constituents to true healing, in my estimation. Now, just to put it up front out there, I'm not a doctor and I am not a practicing alchemist in this sense. I don't do any laboratory work with alchemy, but there are those very skilled out there who have been practicing this and putting out some high-quality tinctures and elixirs for people to facilitate that healing response in their body. And there's those that know a lot more about this than myself, but I just wanted to lay down some foundations and give you some basics so you have a basic understanding of the difference between alchemical medicine and modern medicine. Because alchemical medicine takes into account the spiritual component, that unseen component, the essence of a thing. And this, in my view, is everything in regards to facilitating the healing factor in people. When you understand there's more to cause and effect sequence in this reality than just what can be observed and objectively measured physically, then you begin to understand a little bit of something more important here. And this is all related to these same old alchemical sciences. And like I said, we're going to be reading from the Alchemist's Handbook, written by the great late Frater Albertus. And this was originally published in 1960 with reprints in 1974 and 1978. Frater Albertus died in 1984. And he left a corpus of work that's very important to the modern spagyric processes and the modern alchemical processes that those who have picked up his work and run with it are doing a tremendous job with. You see, there's important confluences of healing factors involved here that aren't considered by mainstream medical systems, by doctors, by pharmacists, by those that practice pharmacology. They miss the point to all of this, but thankfully we have those who have recognized this and have taken the ball and run with it. Now, the bulk of Frater Albertus's work wound up in the hands of one Phoenix Aurelius, who, by the way, is a very intelligent fellow. He's got many things going on, and I believe he is certainly helping people with the things he's producing. And he's trying to mainline this into medical science. And it's an uphill battle for the guy, so give that guy support if you can, because he certainly has taken the ball and run with it. He inherited much of Frater Albertus's work. And we need to recognize the importance of the alchemical processes in the healing of people and the workings of the immune system in the human being. And not recognizing this has left us in a place where we have illness and dis-ease across the board in the bulk of humanity, and combined with the various attacks we are facing from the various pollutants in the atmosphere, and talking, of course, about not only man-made pollution, but radio frequency pollution, as well as all the chemical stuff that we do recognize going on, the way they've been messing with our food. All of these things have a factor. And all of these things actually suck the essence dry of many of the healing factors within people. So if we recognize this, and we recognize the importance of combining the old alchemical sciences with modern medicine, and utilizing 100% of the essence of a thing into the healing that goes on, I think we'll be in a much better place. So I just wanted to outline some of the basics here. And like I said, a lot of this stuff for me gets complex and complicated, and I've been studying this stuff for many years. So I know sometimes a lot of people will get discouraged and tune out because they don't understand what's being construed by the symbols that are being presented in the alchemical processes. So it's important that we give you just a fundamental breakdown in a practical way, and what more practical way than an actual manual for practical laboratory alchemy. So Frater Albertus laid this all down, published this in 1960, and we have it here today as a reference work. And we're going to start in the foreword, and we'll read through the foreword, and we'll read through the preface, and we'll get into some of the basics here. Foreword. The foreword, by the way, was written by one Mr. Israel Rigardi, whom you may recognize the name. You see, this guy was involved in very many of the secret society groups and has made a name for himself in Western occultism. So he wrote the foreword for this, and as I always caution you, you do need to utilize discernment in many of these things, and oftentimes the misconceptions about the symbols are what throw us off. So the secret society groups recognize the importance of alchemy, and although they recognize it, they largely don't put a public face behind alchemy, because they don't want the public to have a grasp of alchemy, because you see, those dark occultists who run things in this world, those ones who have taken over, would prefer for you to be totally ignorant of all of it. So they oftentimes will not openly acknowledge these things for the public to discover. But they do very much understand the importance of them, and this is no different. So Israel Rigardi wrote the foreword here. So let's read right from the foreword, and we'll get into it. This is the age of how to do it books. There is one on almost any subject you can think of. Since they fill a variety of needs, they have proven a boon. From them you can learn to paint, sew, plant an herb garden, build a brick barbecue in the backyard, become an interior decorator, and rewire your own home. Almost every imaginable topic has been covered by these books. So if you assumed that this manual falls in this category, you would be right, save for the simple fact that it is a great deal more. Alchemy has exerted a strange fascination over mankind for centuries. The underlying philosophical theorem was that if the divine will had originally acted upon the prima materia to produce the precious metals and all else, why should not the alchemist, purified in mind and body, and an expert in the then-known laboratory techniques, seek to emulate the natural process in a shorter span of time? One has only to read a good history of chemistry or to peruse a little of the vast alchemical literature to become aware of its awful seductiveness. Men have left homes and families, squandered fortunes, incurred sickness and disease, gambled away prestige, social and other positions in quests of the goals perceived in the alchemical dream: longevity, perfect health, and the ability to transmute base metals into gold. One must not be deluded by superficialities here. The alchemical adepts were patently dedicated and God-fearing men, holding the highest spiritual ideals conceivable. It is too bad more practitioners of the art did not perceive these goals. Going to pause for a moment here, folks. The original intent behind alchemy was not something superficial or bad. It has nothing to do with transmuting lead into gold for the acquisition of wealth and power. This has been a perversion of the alchemical process and the alchemical sciences, and this is largely what has been sought after by those that turn to the dark side of these things. So that's a misconception, and of course that's always how it's presented in the public view. But of course, like everything else, this is a tool, and it can be used to do good things or it can be used to do bad things. The problem is, many of those people who have acquired positions of power in this world have misused this for their own greedy ends. They've misused many of these philosophies and sciences for their own advantage over others and to establish their own sense of power over others. And this is wherein it becomes problematic. You see, it's a tool, like anything else. And this tool has been wielded by those with ill intent toward the rest of us. And that's the problem, because they've sought to keep these things secret from us so that they can maintain that control. But of course, as I've alluded to many other times here, with the invention and the advent of the internet, now these things are at our fingertips in a way they never were before. You wouldn't be able to get your hands on something like this about 15 years ago. Maybe even less time than that, 10 years ago. But thankfully, this stuff is now available out there due to the digitization of records. And although the intention of this internet that they've invented and put into place was a bad intent, we can use it for good things. It's a tool like anything else. It's a shame that those that steer the development of these things have ill intent for the rest of us, but we are certainly turning the tide by using these tools for the good. It's the same thing for alchemy. Same thing for alchemy. This can be used for good effects, rather than ill intent of those greedy select few power brokers in this world that want to maintain their positions of power. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and continue. Only recently, a journalist wrote that the Paracelsus Research Society, which sponsors this manual, offered to teach alchemy in 2 weeks. How could one be so myopic or illiterate? In the early 14th century, Bonus of Ferrara spoke of alchemy as, quote, the key of all good things, the art of art, the science of sciences, end quote. Not only was the alchemist to be concerned with the purification of metals and the elimination of sickness and disease from the human race, but he affirmed that alchemy as science and art provided both a means to synthesize all the other sciences and a training of the intellectual and spiritual faculties. Going to pause for a moment here. So this is one of the factors that makes alchemy so important. And largely, this is lost on our society and our education system today. We don't look at our modern sciences or arts through the lens of alchemy anymore. And in leaving this lens of observation out, we're losing the essence of the thing. And that is the key and the important part of it. That is what makes it alchemy, the science of sciences, the art of arts. It's the spiritual component that's been separated, that's missing in modern society. And we see the fruits of that manifesting, don't we? Let's continue on. The fascination that alchemy has always held over mankind has surely been tainted in that rarely were there higher institutions of learning where promising students might study the ancient art, or where the proper techniques and methods might be learned as with other arts and sciences. No doubt, after the manner of the mysterious 17th century Rosicrucians, individual disciples were selected and trained by a master alchemist. We know that they had assistants and apprentices, for who could have kept the fires stoked in the furnaces, and washed the unending stream of glass and clay utensils employed in calcining, separating and distilling? Or who would have done all the 1,001 menial things that are so easily performed today that we barely have to think about them? But whether or not these assistants were ever encouraged to learn or to acquire the requisite disciplines and procedures, this is problematical. In the vast literature on the subject, there is nothing that I have ever found that even pretended to demonstrate fundamental principles. Traditional alchemy, with its emphasis on piety, secrecy, and allegory, is admittedly obscure. Over the years, I have met many men who could talk a good line about alchemy, but nothing practical ever emerged from them, nor did anyone volunteer to demonstrate its basic truths in a laboratory or over the kitchen stove. Not one until I met the author of this manual some years ago. Not one until I read the first limited edition of this manual, which literally is worth its weight in gold. Gonna pause for a moment here. So we're talking about practical alchemy. Now, there are those who speak of spiritual alchemy and speak of alchemy in a theoretical sense, but do not practice the techniques and cannot demonstrate the techniques. Unfortunately, I am one such person. I don't have any of the proper training to perform these alchemical processes, but I do know of some folks who are actually doing this and utilizing this in a laboratory setting and doing practical things with it. And it can be demonstrated. There is truth behind how this stuff works. Now, Frater Albertus was actually putting this into practice. And there are a lot of people that talk about this. I'm one of those people. I talk about alchemy because I recognize the importance, but I lack the skill set and the education to actually do anything with it. Nor do I have any means of setting up a practical laboratory to do anything of the sort. It's not in my wheelhouse, but I do understand the theory and the philosophy behind it. And that is one of the keys to this. But putting it into practical use is something not everybody is able to do. And here is one of the important things that he's speaking of here. Not everybody knows how to do this, but there are some instructional guides out there now that can help people towards this goal, but it is a spurious path. Let's put it that way. And if you're not prepared and you don't have the esoteric literacy to decipher the symbols, you're not going to get there. So even with a practical alchemy guide like this, you're not going to get there unless you've spent years studying the symbols, knowing what it represents, knowing what it really means, and how to use it in practical processes. It takes years of training, years of practice, oftentimes years of apprenticeship. And there are not many practicing alchemists today in a laboratory setting producing tinctures and elixirs in this way. You see, what's happened is modern medicine and pharmaceuticals have taken over, and they only perform part of the process, and they lose the essence of the thing. And oftentimes the components they put in are not the best components to get the job done. They use petroleum-based products, by and large, in the production of medicines. And often these have negative side effects on the human body. Whereas when you get down to the core of alchemy and the essence of a thing, you don't have that as much. You don't have the negative side effects as much. So let's go ahead and we'll continue on. So remember here, Israel Regardie said that this manual is worth its weight in gold. Incidentally, a few years ago I wrote something in recommendation of this manual, yet expressing criticism of its literary style, its form of expression, the innumerable typographical errors. This was silly and arrogant, for even if theoretically the book were written in the worst possible style, it would still be unique and a genuine masterpiece. Had it not been written and published, we would be the losers by far. It teaches with clarity, simplicity, and accuracy the technical means whereby the lesser circulation may be accomplished. It should be a revelation to those who have not previously been introduced to this method of dealing with herbs. The great work is said to be essentially an extension of the same process, the same techniques, with the same universal philosophy. Going to pause for a moment here, folks. The great work being invoked here. And this, in my estimation, is where the perversion and inversion of the great work comes in. You see, in the modern parlance, what's been distilled out, the essence of the thing, the spiritual component, is the missing piece to the fulfillment of this great work. And when these dark occultists at the top of the power structure in this world are speaking of the great work, well, their great work is a different great work than what was originally intended. So when you understand that, you understand everything going on in this world. Dark forces have taken hold of power in this world and have misused these processes to transmute the minds of men. And we see the fruits of that happening today. Let's continue on. Many an alchemist of former years would have given his eye teeth, or surely a small fortune, for this information. Many might have been spared disaster and destruction had they been familiar with the data contained in this manual. Descriptions of the alchemical processes are not readily understood in terms of modern chemistry. This is not to say that some formal training in high school or first-year college chemistry would not be useful. At the very least, it would have provided the dexterity to use the equipment also used in alchemy. But even if it were possible to translate the one system into the terminology of the other, the alchemists are haunted by the fear of revealing too much, too easily, or too soon, thus opening the way to abuse. Modern man has shown himself to be an adept in the art of abusing nature, as all our current emphasis on ecology and environmental pollution has indicated. So there is considerable justification for their doubts and for the allegorical mode of expression they have deliberately chosen. Going to pause for a moment here, folks. So let's put it this way. This guy's not wrong. Man does, modern man especially, does have a propensity to abuse nature and natural processes. And it's no different when it comes to something that requires the patience that alchemy does. You see, it can be a very lengthy process. A very lengthy process. Requires patience, attention to detail, perseverance, and not everybody has that kind of attention span. It's been deliberately engineered out of us. So we're always looking for quick solutions. So you could look at the pharmaceutical branch of medicine as kind of the fast food of medicine, if you want to use that allegory. It's quick, it's easy, it's cheap, and it provides a little bit of relief to whatever's ailing you for a time. But it's not a cure, and this is wherein the problem lies, because the essence is missing. It's just filler, and that's the problem. Yes, it can temporarily relieve symptoms, doesn't address the core problem, though. Doesn't address the root of the problem. So, this is what's gone on in society, because we are an impatient bunch. We have shortened attention spans. We're always looking for some kind of a quick, cheap method of solving a problem, rather than putting the work in. This comes down to another comparison I could make. Nutrition. Nutrition is of utmost importance in maintaining your health, but most people don't want to put the work into devising a healthy diet, maintaining a healthy diet. Instead, they would rather go for the shortcut. Give me the Ozempic, the weight loss will come. Well, there's some terrible side effects that are being revealed with that now. You see, these things are very popular right now, especially pushed by the entertainment media. All the celebrities out there are using this pharmaceutical product to lose weight when that's not what the original intention was behind it, but it was certainly a side effect of it. And there's reasons for this, because it does some harmful things to the human body and its ability to adapt and take in nutrients. And it can have long-term effects, and they're discovering this now. But once again, it's this fast food mentality. It's the same thing with our medicine. We don't want to take the time or the discipline to do the right things, to work on, first of all, nutrition as a base or foundation for our health. And I'm preaching to the choir here, I know, and I'm not perfect at this either. I do enjoy food. That's one of my big vices. I love food. It tastes so good, even if most of our food today is not really food, but food-like products. It tastes good, and oftentimes we're limited in what we can afford by our circumstances. It's very hard to find good, true, organic foods. Whole foods, natural foods. We're so separated from nature, it's hard to get that for most people. So we do our best with what we have, but at any rate, it comes back to this whole fast food mentality that we have as a culture, especially here in Western society. We want a quick and immediate type of an effect from these things. We want what we want, and we want it yesterday. It's the instant gratification society that we live in. So we look for these shortcuts. We look for these Band-Aids to put on the wound and then forget about it rather than try to get the wound to heal itself. So, that being the case, let's get back to the reading here. Do not be deceived. Simply as this book is written, alchemy is a hard taskmaster. It demands patient and laborious service. There is no simple or easy path to the great work. It requires great dedication of purpose, sincerity, and willingness to pursue this path to the bitter end, no matter at what cost. One of the older alchemists stated that the fundamental process is so simple that even women and children could accomplish it. Maybe. It is only after one has arrived at the other shore, as it were, that one can realize that, except ye become as little children, ye cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. Meanwhile, it requires effort, labor, and prayer, or its equivalents, to achieve the simple childlike state capable of achieving the goals of alchemy. Not many have been blessed with the special genetic or psychological structure, or the perseverance or the grace of God to find it. But if you really want to learn the basic principles of practical alchemy, here they are in this wonderful little manual. There is no other book that I have ever encountered in all my long years in this movement that is one fraction as clear or as helpful. 40 years ago, I would have found it far more intriguing and illuminating than Mrs. Atwood's heavy and ponderous tome on which I exercised my wisdom teeth. Study it and work at the processes described. Practice it is so much more rewarding and enlightening than a sterile head trip. Ora et labor. Pry and work, but work. Without this, you cannot even begin, and this book describes how to go to work, and with what. And this is signed Israel Regardi. Like I said, this book was first published in 1960, with some reprints in 1974 and 1978. Frater Albertus passed away in 1984, and the corpus of his work was left to the Paracelsus Research Society, who wound up gifting this to Phoenix Aurelius. So Phoenix has the corpus of Frater Albertus's work, and he has built upon that, and he is doing some wonderful things. So if you haven't checked out what he's doing, go over to his website, Phoenix Aurelius. You could Google him and find his website. He has a research academy wherein he teaches some of the basics of alchemy to students who are interested in signing up for the courses, and he also offers various tinctures and elixirs that he produces himself in these alchemical formulae, using the proper alchemical formulae to do so in his laboratory. It's interesting. I find this stuff hugely fascinating, and it is important that all of these factors are garnered into it, because there's energetic signatures that can be applied to these things that are missing components in the modern pharmaceutical production facilities. Our modern medicine is missing pieces. And this alchemical corpus is some of that. And this is one of the most clearly outlined books that you can find on the alchemical processes. Now, there are some other ones out there that will introduce you to spagyric processes that can also be helpful, but this one really ties it together well from what I've read in here. But you do need to understand the symbols, and that is what requires even more study. That is what requires more to this laborious process, as described here by Israel Regardie in the foreword. But now let's get to the preface here of the first edition. We'll see what else is in this book, and we will, before we sign off today, get into some of the basics here in the beginning portion of the book. And you can find this. This is available now as a free PDF download online. You could find it if you search for it. I would recommend reading it if you're interested in learning how these alchemical processes work. Like I said, you do have to do a little bit of deciphering and decoding the symbolic language. This has always been the difficult task in alchemy, because when you read some of the old alchemical treatises that have been put out there, it's like reading Greek, and if you don't speak Greek, you don't get it. And it's the same thing here. It's this whole language of symbology. It's the symbols they use to represent the sulfur, the mercury. They're not talking about what you think they're talking about on the plain and open end of this. Let's put it that way. They're not speaking of literal sulfur or salt or mercury, the elemental components that we think of in our modern science. It's a philosophical principle, and it can be applied in different ways for different portions of the process. And it really takes years of study to understand what's being conveyed here. And a little bit of disclosure, I still don't completely understand it. Anybody who tells you they completely understand this stuff, well, they're not being straight with you. Let's put it that way. There are those that have more understanding of these symbols and what their intent and their meaning is, but nobody fully understands these processes except for maybe a master alchemist, of which there are so few that have existed in the history of mankind, who ever got to that lofty level. And some of those have actually pushed forward some of this information, but they always do so in the form of allegory, through the use of symbolic language, through the use of these symbols that represent something entirely different than what you think they do. Of course, they claim to have done this out of necessity. And maybe they're right, I don't know. I don't have the answers to that, but ostensibly the excuse all the different secret society groups have always used is, well, because the church persecuted them for blasphemy and this kind of thing, so they had to hide what they were talking about because it went against what the church, the Catholic Church, wanted. Well, that excuse only goes so far. Because, you see, they've been hiding these things since before the church age. So there was no justification at that time for hiding those things, at least the excuse they give within the secret society groups today for keeping this secret knowledge doesn't stand up to reason or scrutiny when you look back into older times. But certainly they maintain that, and that's their carte blanche excuse for everything. Now, maybe they have legitimate reasons, and I would say in some regards with some of this stuff they do have some legitimate reasons for hiding it in allegorical symbology. Maybe they do. Maybe they're justified in that, but that's a discussion for another time. But let's get back to the reading here. So the author, Frater Albertus, in this preface to the first edition says, "This little volume has been prepared under great difficulties due to the immense scope of the subject matter and the consequent necessity of abbreviating so much valuable material. And yet it is almost impossible to condense this presentation of arcane knowledge without running the risk of causing greater confusion in the reader's mind. For the neophyte on the path, alchemy undoubtedly represents a great quest. To help ease somewhat the commencement of its study, the contents of this book, in the author's opinion, represent an aid in the form of an essential yet simple outline for the pursuance of practical laboratory alchemy. Whoever cannot comprehend what follows has no alternative but to forget the whole matter for the time being. Going to pause for a moment here. So whoever cannot comprehend what is written in this book has no alternative but to forget the whole matter for the time being. You see, like I was alluding to earlier, the difficulty in pursuing this knowledge and wisdom in the art of alchemy is in understanding what the symbolic language means. And this, in and of itself, takes years and years of study and practice. And without that basic foundation, you can't even begin to attempt to pursue the practical laboratory workings of it. So that's what makes this such a laborious and tedious process, wherein you need patience and perseverance, and you need to learn. And sometimes things come to you quickly, and other times they don't. It's all about the individual process that we go through. This is part of it, too, and this is understood when you observe things through the alchemical lens. Everybody learns at a different rate, learns through different means, learns through different applications. And sometimes you understand something right away, and other times it's a complete baffling mystery to you, and you can't make heads or tails of it, so you need to walk away. And then sometimes, even years later, you'll go back to that same thing, and then you'll understand it. This is all part of the alchemical path. And everybody's path is slightly different, so some people can pick it up quickly, and some people don't. But the point that Frater Albertus is making here is if you begin to read in this and you're not understanding exactly what he's saying through the symbolic language, through the use of these things, well, then you're not ready yet, and you're better off to just put it down and walk away, and perhaps pursue some other avenue of learning about this language that's used in alchemy before you try to proceed any further. Now, I certainly would not attempt any type of a laboratory usage of this with my basis of knowledge in it right now, because even though I've spent many years studying and looking at this stuff and trying to decipher and decode it, I'm still nowhere near ready to actually perform anything on a practical level with this, nor would I attempt it. It's not my place, and I know that's not my path. That's not what I'm intended to do. It's not my bag, if you put it that way. But I do want to understand the theoretical concepts. I do want to understand what the symbols mean. And I do want to understand what are these missing components that we have today. And I do want to understand this alchemical process and its importance to medicine. And I would like to see this reinstated within our medical systems, because I do recognize that these components are important and they are missing from our pharmaceutical models and from our medical model. These important natural ideas that go back to the very beginnings of civilization. These things which may have been understood a little bit more by the common man in past eras. Well, all these things are missing now. We have just a remnant of it in our mainstream medical models. Alchemy is an important component to medicine, as it is to much of the rest of life and science and art, as explored here in the preface to this book. If you don't understand some of the basic precepts of alchemy, you're missing the essence inherent in all of this, the essence inherent in life itself. the essence in discovery, the essence of the grand mystery that we live in here. That's one of the beautiful aspects of life, is exploring the mysteries of life. And I find it not only kind of ironic, but interesting that they chose the misnomer of mystery schools and mystery teachings, mystery religions, to describe these things, because absolutely, it's about exploring the mystery of existence. All of it. And alchemy is a key component to this, and it's missing in our modern science, in our modern arts, in our modern philosophies, in our modern culture. And I think it's an important piece of the puzzle that we have to have. But let's go ahead and we'll continue reading here. So then, Frater Albertus goes on to say, I sense the rebuff awaiting me from my students of the abstract sciences and their accusation of empiricism for presenting this work. However, this does not justify an apology on my part for what has been set forth in these pages. It represents an honest conviction based on practical experimentation in a university laboratory, as well as extensive tests and investigation in my private laboratory, originally founded on a firm belief in the truth to be discovered in the concealed teachings of the alchemists, especially those of Paracelsus and Basilius Valentinus, and the authors of the Collectanea Chemica. The ushering in of the atomic age should have made it comparatively easy to lay aside some of the prejudices which were previously held, yet they are still partially sustained by an incongruous criterion. Why is it so unreasonable to assume, casting aside the overwhelming percentage of charlatans and impostors who call themselves alchemists, that such men as Paracelsus and Valentinus did speak the truth about their discoveries? Is it because of what may seem in absurd terminology intermixed with metaphysical symbolism? Suppose, then, that this represents one of the main arguments. A red lion or a peacock's tail become, therefore, impossible childish nonsense for the simple reason that, in current technical terminology, word combinations such as tetraphenyl ethylene dichloride are standard expressions in the world of science. Similar letter and number combinations are no puzzle to one initiated into the marvels of chemistry. When such a term as tetraphenyl ethylene dichloride is expressed by means of its chemical symbol, and it gives the long chemical symbol here, which would be 2C to the 6th, H to the 5th, and it goes on with this long chemical compound name. And certainly he's correct. Your modern chemists will recognize these symbols and know what they mean. Well, the same thing could be said of alchemy, the symbols used in alchemy, but they're a more simplified type of a way of thinking than these chemical formulas given here, with the periodic table being a modern contrivance used to express some of these substances. So when you look at it through that lens of observation, understand when they're talking about things like the red lion, the peacock's tail, they're speaking of something specific, but the terms they're using aren't familiar to you. They would only be familiar to you if you were perhaps trained in this alchemical language, much like a chemist would recognize the chemical formula and know what it means. But the average layperson would have no clue. If you see this big, long formulation, you're not going to know what that is. You understand it's a chemical substance, but you don't know exactly what it is. Well, the chemist learns how to decipher that. Same thing could be said here. The alchemist learns how to decipher these symbols. And this is one of the difficult tasks with this. So then the author goes on here to say, this makes sense to the chemist. However, to the layman, it represents only a meaningless scramble of letters and numbers. The chemical terminology likewise conveys no meaning to him. Valentinus, who, with Paracelsus, shares fame as the father of modern chemistry and medicine, writes about himself, quote, Though I have a peculiar style in writing, which will seem strange unto many, causing strange thoughts and fancies in their brains, yet there is reason enough for me so doing. I say enough that I may remain by my own experience, not esteeming much of others' prating, because it is concealed in by knowledge, seeing having always the preeminence before hearing, and reason hath the praise before folly. End quote. To the scientist, this may smack too much of empiricism and will be disparagingly discarded by him. It is really so unreasonable to accept the symbolism and word combinations of the alchemists of the Middle Ages in the same light that we now take for granted the assertions of science. I'm going to pause for a second. So he's asking the question, is it really unreasonable to understand that the alchemists, when they use these different symbols or expressions to represent part of the process, is it really so unreasonable to accept those the same way we would accept these modern chemical formulas in modern chemistry? I don't think it is. It's just we don't know how to decipher the symbol. We don't know what they're talking about, much like if you're not a chemist and they give you this chemical formula with this list of letters and numbers representing these different factors on this periodic table of elements, and if you're a layman, you don't necessarily understand that. It's the same thing with alchemy. They just use a different language to express the ideas, and the symbols don't necessarily represent the same thing all the time. That's the only difference. It depends upon what part of the process they're talking about. These things can have a distinctive meaning at different times. So when you understand that, it helps to break this down a little bit more. Let's read on. The foregoing certainty deserves an honest answer. In the following pages, should my hypotheses become evident to the reader, may they represent an attempt to keep the torch gleaming in these times of Stygian darkness. Centuries ago, this flame was lighted by alchemists whose names eventually will be honored by the children of those now making vain efforts to ridicule them. It is anticipated that this handbook will not see an enormously large edition, since only a few may want to own a work on a subject which has fallen into such ill repute. Yet those who have tried for some time to start experimentation in their laboratories in order to discover if there really is truth to be found in alchemy, will find welcome and perhaps valuable help in its contents. There is no doubt in the author's mind that serious and prepared students can accomplish what is outlined in these pages. Many years have elapsed since the writing of the present manuscript. After due deliberation, it has been considered timely now to hand it to the printer so that others may benefit from it. May it become what the title indicates, namely a handbook for alchemistical novices, with peace profound, signed Frater Albertus, Salt Lake City, Utah, USA, May 6th, 1960. Gonna pause there. So you see what's outlined here may be hugely beneficial to anybody who is interested in pursuing an education in alchemy. This is a practical handbook for that. And it didn't go into large circulation in print. Because you see, in 1960, I'm sure there were very few people really seriously pursuing this avenue of thought. But there's always this remnant that remains. And we have this now as a practical tool for anybody in the modern era who's looking for this, and now it can be found relatively easily by anybody who's searching for it, whereas in years past something like this would be very hard to obtain. Now then, here's a preface to the revised second edition. It is with thanks that acknowledgement is given to Stanley Herbert and Percy Robert Bremer, both Paracelsus Research Society students, for their efforts to revise the first edition of the Alchemist's Handbook. Their help in this second edition is much appreciated, since in its first appearance the book was full of typographical and grammatical error. The final proofs were read, but the corrections not made before going to press. These errors have now been corrected. It is to be hoped that by carefully following the instructions, the practical results which may be obtained will prove of help to the serious student of alchemy with visible manifestations in the laboratory. That such results are obtainable is beyond question, as a great number of the students who have studied practical alchemy with the Paracelsus Research Society can testify. This applies not only to the lesser work with plants, but also to minerals and metals. More than a decade of practical laboratory work taught openly with no cloak of secrecy or any oath of silence should be proof of the validity of this work. Signed by Frater Albertus once again. So this is a second edition copy, which I'm reading from, wherein there were spelling and grammatical errors in the first edition, and these were corrected. I don't know what other edits were made to the second edition, but largely the corpus of the main important parts remains. So here we go. Let's get into the heart of the matter altogether. Chapter 1, Introduction to Alchemy. This is the important foundation which we need. Let's read. What is alchemy? This is the first and most vital question to be answered before a study of the following pages should be undertaken. This question can be answered to the satisfaction of the inquiring mind, but all careless paging through this book will be to no avail. If the reader has no previous knowledge of alchemy, and moreover no knowledge through conscientious study concerning mysticism, occultism, or related subjects, the answer to the above question will have little meaning. What, then, is alchemy? It is the raising of vibrations. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. The raising of vibrations. This is the definition given by Frater Albertus here. Now, it may sound like hokum to those who aren't familiar with this way of thinking, but certainly this is a true statement. The raising of vibrations. This is part of the core of what I would call the essence behind it. The essence, the raising of the vibratory frequency of the essence. And this is one of the key concepts as a foundation to this. So let's read on and see what else Frater Albertus can tell us. For this reason, it is wise not to attempt to experiment with the laboratory outlines that follow. These experiments are only for those who have spent considerable time in spagyric research and who have proven to themselves that an honest endeavor has prevailed, and that this same endeavor still motivates their true search for the highest arcana, the lapis philosophorum, the philosopher's stone, folks. As all students of alchemistical literature have come to realize that the exact process for the opus magnum has never been completely revealed in simple language or put into print, they will appreciate the fact that here is given a detailed description of the lesser circulation. In alchemy, there are the lesser and greater circulations. The former pertains to the herbal kingdom, and the latter to the most coveted of them all, the mineral or metallic realm. I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. There are many different kinds of alchemy. Two of the kinds largely accepted by Paracelsus and by the practical laboratories of alchemy today are the spagyric or herbal kingdom and the metallic kingdom, the metals, the mineral kingdom. Now, alchemy of the mineral kingdom is much more difficult than that of the herbal kingdom or the plant-based alchemy, the spagyrics. Many of the processes are parallel, but there are differences in them, enough differences, that only those who have become very adept in alchemy can even begin to try to pursue mineral alchemy or metallic alchemy. It's much more difficult and it's much more dangerous. But let's continue on and see what else Frater Albertus reveals to us here. A correct understanding, and not just knowledge, of the herbal process will open the gate to the great arcanum. Months and years of experimentation in your alchemical laboratory will prove the truth of this statement. The fact that alchemy is a life's work will be accepted by those who have spent months and years behind books and retorts. It is this significant fact which provides our spagyric art with such an armor that no materialist can pierce it. If it were not for the cleansing, purging, and aging of the alchemist to be over a great length of time, like the subjectum he is working with, how could it be kept from the profane and the unworthy? Only that which has stood the test of fire has been purified. That there is still a cloak of secrecy covering alchemical processes, and that this must yet remain so, will have to be accepted by all aspiring alchemists. For personal greed has no place in alchemy. The aim of all true adepts is to help relieve a suffering mankind in its physical and spiritual misery. A non-acceptance of this excludes one automatically from the circle of adepts. Going to pause for a moment here, folks. This is where many have been deceived and misled. This is where much of this corpus of knowledge and wisdom has been misused and abused by dark occultists who seek to achieve their own greedy personal goals with this. And this is wherein some of the difficulty lies, because you're not going to learn how to do this properly without a justified or pure heart in pursuing these things. This is what all the alchemists have always taught. But yet, lo and behold, we've always, through the course of time, had those who have misused these sciences and these techniques in many ways. And oftentimes they pursue ill uses of this, and in their pursuit of this, they cause misery and harm. And oftentimes they cause misery and harm to themselves in their ultimate goal of transmuting lead into gold. You see, it's just as much allegorical as it is literal in its interpretation. They don't go in it with a right spirit and a right heart and a right mind. And over the course of time, their ideologies warp, and they begin to misuse this tool, and they don't ever actually come to the ultimate secrets thereof, because of this impurity of heart. At least that's what the alchemists tell us. Now, I don't know if anybody really out there has ever been able to achieve some of the goals that are put forward in alchemy here. But we do see the success in some of these spagyric processes. This plant-based alchemy. Now, the mineral alchemy is different, slightly, and a lot more dangerous, as I said. And, of course, there's also this notion of spiritual alchemy that goes along with it. You see, all of these allegorical contexts could be read into the corpus of this. There's different applications, you see. The symbols mean different things on these different levels in these different forms of alchemical processes. So what has been laid out here is important. It is what is largely accepted in the spagyric processes, and has shown practical application to those who are devoted enough to understanding and studying it. And you'll see Frater Albertus reveals here that don't even try it unless you've spent years in preparation and study, learning about the symbols, what they mean, learning the allegories, learning the symbolism, learning the language, learning about things like occultism, hermeticism, all of these basic precepts before you can even approach alchemy in a practical way. And of course, they always say that this cloak of secrecy around all of it is necessary. Are they right? I don't know. I don't know if that's truly necessary to keep all of this stuff hidden from the quote-unquote profane Perhaps they were worried that people, if they had learned the true processes here, would misuse them more than they already have. But those who have it in their heart and are determined enough to misuse this stuff most certainly have done so and will do so. They will learn the required things, and you see, this is a path that can be quite convoluted and messy, and many people who begin to follow this path eventually become compromised by the dark side of it. They become impatient. They want to take the shortcut. They want to go the short route. They become influenced by other dark powers that lead them off course and lead them to this place where they want to pursue these promises in shorter time. And that is not the path of perseverance that all of them seem to espouse here when you look at these things. They always advise against this, but lo and behold, many fall into these traps anyway, regardless of all the warnings and all the advice that there's no shortcuts to this, and that taking shortcuts is a bad idea. But let's go ahead and we'll continue on. So it says here, the aim of all true adepts is to help relieve a suffering mankind in its physical and spiritual misery. A non-acceptance of this excludes one automatically from the circle of adepts. So they will not regard you as an adept, at least according to what Frater Albertus says here, if you have greedy or self-serving types of intentions in the use of this. That's what they claim. But certainly, I think there are those who have become adepts who may have been corrupted over the course of time, and their adeptship probably has not been renounced in that way. But let's continue on. My friends of the medical profession, as well as the pharmaceutical chemists, will readily disagree with me when reading what follows. This must be taken for granted, and in fact has been so, since what is presented here is so foreign to the standardized teachings in present-day medical colleges. Since I agree with them on their terms, it is only fair to ask that they think of the contents of this book in the terms of an alchemist. If this is impossible, then the book should be laid aside for the time being and forgotten until it can be examined by an open mind, free from prejudice. Going to pause for a moment. So certainly, those highly indoctrinated people who have become pharmacists, medical doctors, who have studied these things, chemists, they won't understand what's being laid down here because they would have to actually unlearn everything they already learned and forget what they think they know and approach this from the lens or observation point of an alchemist instead of that of what they would term in the modern day a scientist. And much of our science is missing this component. But let's go ahead and continue reading. No attempt is being made here to write on allopathic therapeutics. This should be left to those versed in that particular branch of healing. I am writing here about alchemy because of the years of studies and experiments that have preceded this book, and because of the work that shall, in all likelihood, continue to follow. Since the scope of alchemy is so immense, one earthly incarnation in many, if not most, cases is an insufficient time for the full completion of their work. In climbing the alchemist's ladder, there are many tribulations to consider involving time, money, heartaches, to mention only a few of the difficult steps. The aspirant then should think long and well before undertaking such an ordeal, for if he is not prepared, all will prove unsuccessful. The process, in both the lesser and greater circulation, is basically not expensive. In fact, it is relatively insignificant. But before this state can be reached, much money, time, and effort can, and most likely will be spent. It is for these reasons that an urgent appeal is made not to venture rashly into alchemy, not to see oneself sitting in perfect personal health at the end of a rainbow, with the world at one's feet, and with pots full of glistening gold. These are only illusions and will prove to be but sensational and glamorous fata morgana. They will not satisfy the soul. There is more to be gained in alchemy than vainglory. This, in fact, cannot be obtained in alchemy. Such vainglory is as far from the true goals of alchemy as night is from day. This brings us back to the simple statement made at the beginning of this chapter. Alchemy is the raising of the vibrations. He who sees no meaning in this seemingly unimportant sentence has no right to attempt alchemical experimentation. Such a person is like one who claims that since he knows all the letters of the alphabet, he can therefore read any language, as they are all composed of letters from the same alphabet. But does he read with understanding when the letters are interchanged, forming words in different languages? A chemist may know all the formulas and all the abbreviations of chemical terminology, but does he also understand what they really are, their true origin, their first state? This we shall leave for those who are concerned to answer. If all the foregoing statements do not discourage the aspirant and make him clap the book shut and put it away with disgust, perhaps then it will help him to find himself in this universe and to give peace and contentment to his soul. Hermetic philosophy, with its practical arcanum, repeats itself over and over again in the ancient axiom, as above, so below. As below, so above. We're going to pause for a moment here. So, like I was saying here, if you don't have a foundation in understanding some of the old Hermetic sciences and philosophies, many of these occult teachings that undergird many of the secret society groups, many of the occult fraternities, you're probably not going to understand what's presented here in these alchemical terms. Like I had said earlier, this requires many years of study, practice, understanding, trying to decipher the symbols, putting the work in. You see, that's the whole point to this. You cannot attempt any type of understanding of alchemy without first putting in the laborious work involved with deciphering the symbols, understanding the language, knowing the philosophies. You have to first start in a foundation of perhaps what I would call the Hermetic science or the Hermetic philosophies. This is a foundation on which you can begin a base of knowledge going into this. All these things are preliminary to attempting to approach alchemy, the science of alchemy, the art of alchemy, the philosophy of alchemy. And this philosophy, science, art of alchemy undergirds everything else. And understanding in it gives you a type of discernment. But first, before you can achieve that, you need to understand some of the core tenets of many of these older teachings. And always, Hermeticism is a good place to start. Hermetic philosophy, just even the basics of Hermetic philosophy, will give you a basis to work from in understanding alchemical symbology. Let's read on. It is questionable whether or not historical references to alchemists of the past have a place in these pages. There have been so many books published already that have made it their business to elaborate on the history and romance of alchemy. For this reason, no attempt is being made here to add to the wealth of biographical material supplied by such books. Our emphasis falls rather on present-day alchemistical experimentation, conducted in accordance with age-old practices. Our aim in these pages is to attempt to demonstrate and to reveal the truth of alchemy in contemporary language while still remaining in harmony with ancient rules and rituals according to the alchemist's oath. The practice of alchemy, not only in earlier times, but in our day as well, should be undertaken only with the greatest solemnity. This can be best illustrated by the following oath from Theatrum Chemicum Britannicum, London, 1652. This oath, in only slightly modified form, is still being used by present-day adepts. And I'm going to pause for a moment before I read this oath, folks. You see, this is serious business. Alchemists, too, have their own form of what we would in the modern times understand as the Hippocratic Oath taken by doctors. Alchemists, too, take an oath. That's what's being revealed here. Those practicing alchemists oftentimes will take this oath. Now, this is the oath that they take. I'll read it here for you just to show you that those who pursue this need to take this seriously. Anybody who pursues this needs to take it seriously because they are declaring an oath. And oftentimes there are spiritual components tied to that oath. Same thing with the Hippocratic Oath. There's a spiritual component that we overlook. And violating that oath will bring about spiritual consequences. So don't take this kind of thing lightly, and do not swear this oath if you don't mean it. Same thing can be said if you are a doctor and you swear this Hippocratic Oath. If you don't mean it, don't take the oath. Same thing can be said of those who have taken the oath to defend the Constitution of the United States, those in the military. If you don't take that oath seriously, and if you violate that oath, there are going to be spiritual ramifications of that manifest in your life. Same thing can be said of this. Now, I'm not one to take oaths. I don't think taking oaths is a good idea. It's a type of a way of binding yourself in certain regards. Unless, of course, you really firmly believe with all your being that you will abide by that oath. And there are many people who do that, but that's not for everybody. I would advise against the taking of oaths. I would advise against joining groups. This is something that I agree with Crow 777 on. He doesn't join any groups. I feel the same about that. I don't necessarily want to be associated with a group, a particular group. Now, I will interact with these people and be menial and friendly with these people and express my opinions, but I don't want to be engrafted into this ideal and identified with this group, because identifying people in a certain people group can have negative ramifications. Same thing could be said with the taking of oaths without serious consideration. There are real negative things that can happen as a consequence of that if you violate the oath. Or if you associate yourself with a group, you can be identified with them and perhaps suffer consequences because of something that somebody within the group did that you don't necessarily agree with, but you've been painted with the same brush. Not a good idea. So, with all of that aside, let's read this oath. Quote, "Will you with me tomorrow be content faithfully to receive the blessed sacrament upon this oath that I shall here give you, for ni gold ni silver as long as you live, neither for love you bear towards your kin, nor yet to great man performant to win. Then you disclose the secret that I shall you teach, neither by writing nor by no swift speech, but only to him which, you be sure, hath ever searched after the secrets of nature. To him you may reveal the secrets of this art, under the covering of philosophy before this world ye depart." And that's the end of the quote of the oath. So they swear the oath that they won't reveal the secrets, but only to those who they are sure are really seeking after the secrets of nature. That's essentially what the takeaway is from that. So even unto today, the alchemists will not reveal the true nature of what they're doing, the true nature of the symbols used, or what it means or what the actual process is, but only to those who are sincerely seeking these secrets, and that they know and realize and can attest that these people are pure and true in their intention. Then will they share the secrets. Let's read on with what Frater Albertus tells us next. Sooner or later, most students experience a desire to find an adept in order to become his pupil or disciple. But no matter how sincere such a desire is, it is futile for the student to attempt to locate a teacher versed in the grand arcanum. When the pupil is ready, the master will appear. I'm going to pause for a moment here. This is in quotation marks, and this we have heard before, and this does seem to be true in terms of the alchemical context and in terms of the Hermetic axioms and all of these other things. When the time's right, when the pupil is ready, the master will appear. It's interesting how this all aligns together, how it all seems to work. When you are on that certain part of your path, and you're diligently and truly seeking after this information, after this knowledge, after this corpus of wisdom, and you have a pure heart of intention with it, then will a teacher appear to maybe give you the fragmentary pieces that you need in order for you to continue down your path of learning. Now, this is part of what I would call, in the terms given by the mystery schools, part of the initiation process. You see, largely what has happened with this ideal of an initiatory process, an initiation process, the secret societies, the occult fraternities, have all attempted to standardize this initiation process when it should be different for each person. Each individual down the path, everybody's experience is different. This is what I would term natural initiation. You follow your path, and when you're ready, the next phase will unfold before you and reveal itself before you. This is the true initiatory path. This is the natural science associated with this initiation process. Now, what has happened is the secret society groups, the occult fraternities, have hijacked this and have attempted to standardize it into one form, and this is what I call synthetic initiation. And this is what they give you when you enter a secret society group. They put you through this one-size-fits-all ritual to put you through this initiatory process, and most of the time it's a traumatic process. This is akin to what I call a shortcut with this stuff, and this is wherein much of what's been done with this stuff has found its foundation, and why it is a flawed foundation, because they put you through this one-size-fits-all initiation ritual, and they think that this imparts illumination on you. They think that this imparts some type of a mantle upon you. And it's all synthetic, it's artificial, it's a cheap knockoff of the real thing. It's the inversion process in play. And this is what much of the people who put forward these teachings now go through. They don't get there the right way. And that's why they are more easily manipulated and steered to the dark side of things, and that's why we have what we have going on in the world today. This old natural idea has been perverted and inverted and misused. And they take some of the good teachings and they twist them just enough. So there's just that little bit of poison that gets you. And that's what's been done here, and we could see this even if we look at what is presented here by those seeking the path of alchemy. And we understand that this old hermetic axiom holds true. When the pupil is ready, the master will appear. This is how the natural system works. The synthetic version of the secret societies would show you otherwise. Well, you listen to who your sponsor is in that secret society group, and they will lead you. They'll tell you what is true and what's not. They'll lead you down this path. That's not how it works in the secret society groups anymore, folks. The teacher doesn't appear at the right time. They teach you falsehoods. They acknowledge this. They acknowledge that they lie to their lower level initiates in these different secret society groups. We know this to be true if you've been looking at any of this stuff for a long time. So this violates this type of a principle. And therefore, I would advise steer away from anything like that. They're not being straight with you. But let's go ahead and we'll continue reading. So, when the pupil is ready, the master will appear. This ancient precept still holds true. One may search, one may aspire, one may work and study hard until the wee hours of the morning, and yet it will not be evidence that he or she will ever attain that priceless jewel, the grand arcanum. For it takes more than mere study, an honest heart, a clean heart, a true heart, a benevolent and contrite heart accomplishes more than all the book learning can ever do. Yet, strangely enough, learning must accompany the virtues just cited. Without a knowledge and an understanding of natural laws and their corresponding spiritual parallels, no one could ever truly be called an alchemist or a sage. I am not attempting to vindicate alchemy. It needs no vindication. I am advocating the truth in alchemy, for it is a most wonderful experience to have come to a realization, to experience, to realize, to have found the light that shined in the darkness. All the foregoing may seem so discouraging. Perhaps a heavy doubt may weigh upon the heart of the lover of alchemistical research. Whatever the cause or whatever its effects may be, a tremendous responsibility is connected with it. He who has read about the lives of the alchemists has found that most often many years had to elapse before their goal was reached. Not everyone was as fortunate as Irenaeus Philolaethes, who writes that in the 23rd year, that great blessing in the form of the lapis philosophorum was attained. I'm going to pause for a moment. Lapis philosophorum, the philosopher's stone, folks. Many had to await another incarnation before they proved themselves worthy and ready to receive it. But if all doubts are put aside, and if a firm belief has grown into a strong faith, then the quickening moment that produces knowledge will eventually help one come to understand, to realize the oneness of the universe, the secret behind creation, and the unfolding of cosmic consciousness. I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. Now is wherein we get to where the little bit of poison once again is mixed in with this, because it is a preconceived notion in many of these occult fraternities and secret societies and the teachings they put forward that the Creator is the creation is the Creator, all is one. We see this philosophy that underlies all of it, and this is wherein you must utilize discernment to get to the heart and the truth of the matter and realize the Creator is not the creation. Although the Creator does permeate into the creation at certain points, the Creator is not the creation. And this is wherein much falsehood has arisen. Much darkness has come out from those who seek these true paths. You see, the intention of many who go into the exploration of these studies is good at the outset. They have pure intentions, pure heart, pure mind, pure reasoning for pursuing these things, but they get misled into this type of way of thinking, into this understanding of the operations and machinations of the universe. And this is where the little bit of poison is introduced, and that is why you have so few who have ever succeeded in the true pursuit of alchemy. And this is why they still have these traditions wherein you are told you need to have a pure heart, pure intention, pure mind, put in all the laborious work, and even then you're not guaranteed success. Because many who have undergone this process have been indoctrinated through this synthetic initiation process and are therefore led astray into believing in this oneness of the universe idea. And there are some inherent truths behind that as well, but it's misconstrued by the occult fraternities and secret society groups. Essentially, they want you to believe the creation is the creator is the creation, and that's not true. That's wherein a split or a dichotomy of thought begins to occur. And this eventually drifts people over towards this dark side, and maybe they don't have ill intentions, but they don't get the results that they were looking for. They fail in their pursuit because they haven't come to that realization, because they've been misled by those that they trust to teach them the elements of this alchemical process. So anyway, let's continue reading, and we're going to close out here very soon. This brings us to the natural questions. What is the secret of creation, and what constitutes life force? These questions must be answered before the would-be alchemist can accomplish anything in his laboratory. Since everything that grows comes from a seed, the fruit must be contained in its seed. Mark this well, for here lies the secret of creation. The raising of specimen, as said before, is the raising of vibrations. Herbs, animals, as well as minerals and metals grow from seed. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks, and I think this is actually a core philosophical truth that needs to be understood and has been hidden in plain sight from humanity. A seed. You see, we have to understand the notion of a seed. And this also goes across different ways of thinking in the occult philosophies. The notion of things like what they call a seed atom, which represents the essence of a being, and is not an actual physical substance, but is something of a more spiritual capacity that begins to engraft and encompass the entirety of the being. It is the seed from which all things come. And this isn't a physical thing, not a physical seed. It goes beyond that. So when they're talking about the raising of vibrations and the notion of seeds, well, they're talking about a philosophy that lies behind the science that I think has some important truths to it. They're talking about the spiritual component, the essence of a thing, more so than what can be physically, objectively measured in terms of a seed. So let's continue on. To understand this secret of nature, which is only partly revealed to mankind generally, constitutes the main theoretical subject in alchemy. Once this is known, then only the proper understanding is necessary in order to obtain results in the raising or elevating of specimen, which is nothing else but transmutation. If we can help nature in her ultimate goal, that of bringing her products to perfection, then we are in harmony with her laws. Nature does not resent an artificial effort or a shortcut to bring about perfection. Gonna pause for a moment here. Now, are you beginning to see some of the contradiction in ideology that's present here? What have I been telling you about the notion of shortcuts all along? What have the alchemists said about the shortcuts? Well, there's no shortcut. It's a long, laborious process, and you need to put the work in to get the result. Well, now, he's talking about a shortcut in his own words here. Nature does not resent an artificial effort or a shortcut to bring about perfection. Is that so? I don't know if that's the case. I know we as mankind, having been made in the image of our Creator, have been given certain capacities here, and that perhaps attempting to bring about the perfection of a thing is in our nature, but I wouldn't say that this is an artificial effort if that's the case. Unless, of course, you're going about that through some other synthetic means. But of course, he's looking at this as a shortcut. He says nature doesn't resent artificial effort. Explain to me what artificial effort is. I wouldn't say it's artificial effort if it's a natural man performing the feat here, an alchemist, practicing the natural sciences. I wouldn't say that's an artificial effort. The shortcut itself becomes a problematic thing in my view. But anyway, let's go ahead and continue, and he'll give us an example here. To illustrate, the seed of a tomato may be put into the ground late in the fall. Snow and ice may cover it during the winter, but no tomato plant will grow during this time, outdoors in freezing temperatures. However, if the same seed is planted inside where sufficient warmth and moisture is provided, and if it is placed in the proper matrix, it will grow into a plant and bear fruit. This is not contrary to nature. It is in harmony with the natural laws, for fire or heat, water, air, and earth are all that are necessary to cause a seed to grow and bear its predestined fruit. The life force originates not in fire, earth, air, and water. This life force is a separate essence which fills the universe. This essence, or fifth essence, also known as quintessence, is the truly important object that alchemists seek. It is the fifth of the four, fire, water, air, and earth, and is the most important one for the alchemist to find and then to separate. After such a separation has taken place, the answer to what lies behind the secret of creation will then manifest itself partly in the form of a dense smoke-like vapor that settles after passing through the condenser tube into a water-like substance of a yellowish color, carrying with itself something oily, which gives the tinge to the extracted water. This oily substance, or alchemical sulfur, is just as essential to alchemical preparations as salt and essence. I do not wish to go into this any further at this point, as this will be treated more explicitly later on. Going to pause for a moment here. Quintessence, the essence of a thing, the fifth essence. The fifth element, folks. What is he speaking about? Ether. The ether, the etheric. This is about tapping into the etheric portion of our reality and to find the essence of a thing. When you understand that, you understand a lot, because this is wherein the seed germinates from. It is not something that is objectively, physically measurable. It is this fifth element, this philosophical concept, this spiritual component. Two things. It's the connection between man and spirit, the etheric. You see, the etheric plane is a subplane of the physical plane, according to the secret schools. And if you can tap into this, this is where the seed begins to germinate for all things. And they refer to this in alchemy as the essence or quintessence, or the fifth essence, the fifth element, in the philosophical ways of thinking. So what he's offering us here has some truth and merit to it. But I think it's a misnomer to call this a shortcut when you're talking about trying to achieve the perfection of this. I think that is part of what lies within our essence as human beings to do. We have this type of power inherent in us to perfect some of what's been placed before us. This perfection, this raising of the vibratory frequency of a thing. It's a unique ability that human beings have that other spirits do not. Let's put it that way. That the other hierarchies do not have. It is this creative force. It's what's meant when we are said to be made in the image of our Creator. We have this uniquely as human beings, and other portions of the hierarchy of spiritual powers do not. That's what's so important about this whole notion of alchemy and transmutation and all of this. It's a process that can be wielded by human beings and human beings alone. Then you begin to understand why it is that certain dark spiritual forces would seek to cohabitate within man, man being the gateway between worlds, which is why the transhumanist notion of things has come to fruition and is being pursued. Because how else would some type of a spiritual power that does not belong here manifest and be able to hijack these processes, but through the use of the human being as the gateway to get there? Thus, the push for the merging with artificial intelligence. It creates a gateway for some spiritual entity to step in that does not belong here and utilize the human's ability to perform some of these processes. And you see where the dark manipulations have come into play here. But anyway, we're just going to read probably the next paragraph or so and sign off. I don't want to venture too far from the objective of tonight's broadcast. Now, to the Alchemist's laboratory. This usually takes on a sinister coloring as one's imagination runs wild. Even today, so-called religious people are inclined to discuss alchemy in rather subdued whispers because, so they claim, it is the devil's work. Ignorance is bliss to some, and no one has the right to take another out of his or her bliss. We must ignore those that have religious scruples against alchemy, as we do not intend to convert anybody. The aim laid down here is to help the alchemical aspirant on his laborious road. This road begins in the laboratory. Everything in the laboratory revolves around the fire or its emanation, heat. The rest is composed of a few flasks, a condenser, and some ingenuity. It sounds rather simple, and really is so. What about all the other instruments that clutter up an alchemist's laboratory, as pictures would have us believe? Just as an artist needs only canvas, paint, and brushes to paint a picture, but may add an indefinite number of other related objects to his studio, so may an alchemist add other related equipment as he sees fit. No doubt he is going to experiment and probe deeper into the mysteries to unlock one after another. Once the soul hungers and thirsts for truth and the unfoldment of nature's laws, there is no end to its search until the ultimate has been reached. Where should a laboratory be located? How can one practice alchemy in a crowded city? Such questions will have to be answered individually by each student. A corner in an attic or a place in the basement is sufficient, as long as there is a continuous source of heat available. He who wishes to practice our spagyric work will have to do all the work himself. How fortunate! How else could it be? How else can one appreciate the experience if he does not arrive at the crucial point of knowledge by his own individual efforts? Enough has been said now concerning the hardships and disappointments that undoubtedly will be encountered if the student, in spite of these difficulties, still wishes to enter the portals of the Spagyricist holy temple. He will find a welcome guide in the following pages. These unfold in simple language the process of the lesser circulation. Gonna pause for a moment, folks. The lesser circulation being plant-based alchemy, or spagyrics. That's what's being identified here. That's what this book outlines. does not give you a look at the grand arcanum, the great arcanum, the greater circulation of mineral alchemy. You will be very hard-pressed to find any written material on such. I assure you of that. But we can understand some basics in plant-based alchemy, and I think there is a measure of truth to this, and this is a component that is largely missing from our medicinal practices today, and I think there's importance to it. I think understanding these things is a key to perhaps coming to grips with a true healing art. And I am thankful there are those that pursue that. This is not my intention to ever do so. I am not one who would be content to become a practicing alchemist of this sort. That's not my path. That's not what I'm here for. I acknowledge that. But understanding it, I think, is key to understanding so much more. And that's why it's important to pursue these avenues of thought, even if you have no intention of moving forward in a practicing type way with this stuff. Understanding the theory behind it still holds a grand amount of importance. Like I said, there's core truths to all of this, and we must apply discernment, because there's always little fragments of poison interlaced with it, whether intentional or not. I don't think it's intentional. I think Frater Albertus had good intentions and thought he was doing good works, and probably was doing good works. I would say just the production of this book is a good work. So that being the case, people with good intentions can sometimes be misled, and likewise, maybe they're not misled. I don't know. I don't claim to have all the answers. Maybe this was his true life's work, and maybe he was pursuing good intent in putting this forward. I always seem to have a little bit of a problem with the notion of secrecy with this stuff, though, simply because secrecy, at its core, is the first and preeminent form of mind control ever put forward on mankind. If you know something someone else doesn't, that gives you an inherent advantage over them. And this can be misused and abused, and this is largely what's been done with that notion. So I always have a healthy distrust of secrecy, but of course they do claim to have justified reasons for keeping the secrets, and maybe they're correct, maybe they're not, I don't know. But what I do know is you have to apply your own discernment in order to come to grips with true things that are presented in this information, and be able to sort out the false things as well. I invite you to do so. Don't take anything I have to say in and accept it outright. Go and explore and pursue these avenues of thought for yourself. Do your own research. Look at these things yourself. Apply your own discernment. And you'll come to whatever conclusions that will bring you closer to truth, if you know how to do so. We're all on a path, and all our paths are different. By necessity. By necessity. And when you understand that, at some point things begin to unfold before your eyes. You begin to garner more understanding. And we're all in different places, and I don't claim to know all the truths. I don't know. The more I learn, the more I realize that I don't know. So that's also an inherent truth on a path like this. The more you know, or the more you think you know, the less you really do. That seems to be the case. You find out that there's more that you don't know than what you do know. These things run deep, and this is one of the actual beauties of life, is exploring and delving into these mysteries of life. One of the beautiful parts of life. And there is much to be garnered from the acquisition of knowledge and wisdom in regards to these things, so it's not something I would discourage people from pursuing. But you do have to have some discernment in looking at these things. You need to have an open mind, but not so open that your brain falls out. Let's put it that way. But I do see the importance in alchemy and the alchemical processes, and I think this is a key constituent that's missing in our modern medicine, in our modern medical system. And I think that pursuing these ways of thinking can help us in the future to come to better terms with healing processes within the human body, promoting greater healing processes in the human body. So it's important to look at this. And I just wanted to lay the foundations for alchemy here for you folks tonight. If you're interested in pursuing it further, there are others who can teach you far more than I can about it. There are things you can read that will give you better insight into this, and I would recommend this book by Frater Albertus. Interesting stuff, for sure. And I think it's the way forward with medicine, because it's coming to a head now. Our medical system is so corrupt and contrived at this point, and so just toxic to humanity, that we need to pursue another avenue or course of action and thought in attempting healing of the human body. And I think this is the way forward. Going back to the future. You thought it was just a clever movie name, didn't you? Anyway, that's all the time we have for tonight. I want to thank you all for tuning in, and I'll remind you I appreciate each and every one of you. We'll catch you next time. Have a good one now. Discover the amazing, clinically proven health benefits of original Tahitian noni. Original Tahitian noni includes powerful antioxidants, adaptogens, nutrients, and phytonutrients to naturally boost energy levels, immune system function, and overall health. Meticulously sourced from French Polynesia, this is the original superfruit, except no imitations. Original Tahitian noni. Visit ATR Health at alchemicaltechrevolution.com. and click on the Shop Here tab for more details.
But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.